The mop bucket wheels scraped against the marble floor, a sound no one ever noticed, which was precisely the point. Daniel Hayes arrived at Northbridge Holdings at 5:47 every morning, 13 minutes before his shift began. Not because the employee handbook required it, not because anyone would have noticed if he'd walked in at 6 on the dot. Keys jangling, coat still cold. He arrived early because the building at that hour belonged to him in a way it never would at any other time. The lobby was 30 feet of polished white marble and 40 feet of floor-to-ceiling glass. At night, the cleaning crew from the prior shift left everything gleaming, sterile, and perfectly meaningless. But at 5:47, with the radiators just beginning to tick awake and the security desk unmanned except for Marcus at the far end, the whole space had a quality like held breath, like the building itself hadn't decided yet what it was going to be that day. Daniel liked that. He respected it. He hung his coat in the maintenance closet on sublevel 1, clipped his ID badge to his gray uniform shirt, and stood for exactly 3 seconds looking at the photograph taped to the inside of the locker door. Lily, age 7, gap-toothed, holding a paper turkey she'd made from tracing her own hand. She was laughing at something off camera. He'd taken the photo 2 Novembers ago, the last Thanksgiving before everything had changed. He closed the locker. The mop bucket filled. The wheels turned. He pushed it out through the service door and into the main corridor, which led through the secondary atrium and then into the primary lobby, the face of Northbridge Holdings, that got photographed for architecture magazines and corporate brochures. Outside, New York was making the sounds it made in January. Not loud sounds. January was quieter than people remembered. The snow muffled the traffic, softened the usual percussion of the city into something almost restrained. Flakes hit the glass in slow diagonal lines, lit from below by the amber lamps on West 54th Street. Daniel watched them for a moment, the way he always did. His hands were cracked at the knuckles, had been since November, when the building's dry heat started cycling, and the water in the maintenance corridors ran cold. He'd bought the good lotion. The kind Mrs. Eleanor Grant, from 4B, had pressed into his hands one evening in the elevator, with a brisk, unsentimental, "You work with your hands, Daniel. Stop being proud about it." He used it every night after Lily went to sleep. His hands still cracked anyway. He started with the north section of the lobby, where foot traffic tended to concentrate around the revolving doors. Yesterday's salt and slush had left a pale residue across 12 square feet of marble. He worked methodically, overlapping strokes, keeping his weight even. There was a technique to not leaving streaks, and Daniel had perfected it in the 18 months he'd worked here. Before Northbridge, he had worked in logistics management at a mid-size import firm. He'd had an office. He'd had business cards with his name on them and a direct dial number. He'd had a company credit card for client lunches, which he'd used maybe twice because the clients always insisted on paying, and he'd never quite figured out how to insist back. Then his wife, Lily's mother, had walked out of their apartment with 2 suitcases and a very calm, rehearsed explanation that had lasted 11 minutes. He'd timed it afterward, reconstructing it in the silence she left behind. 11 minutes to explain that she hadn't been happy in a very long time, that she wasn't built for this kind of life, that she was sorry about Lily but she trusted him completely, which was perhaps the most honest thing she'd ever said to him. He'd kept the apartment for 4 months before the math stopped working. His mother had taken Lily during the transition. He'd downsized twice. He'd taken the Northbridge position because it was consistent hours 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., which meant he was home when Lily's school bus arrived at 3:15, every single afternoon, no exceptions. This was the thing people never understood about his life, the thing he'd stopped trying to explain at family dinners and in the polite conversations that happened at school pickup. His choices weren't failures. They were architecture. Every single one of them had been deliberately placed to hold something up. He reached the south section of the lobby near the elevator banks. The marble here was slightly different, warmer in tone, a vein of amber running through the white, and it caught the morning light differently. He'd noticed that months ago and had never mentioned it to anyone because there was no one to mention it to. From outside, through the tall glass, a flash of light. Not lightning, Not a car's high beams catching the wet pavement. A camera flash. Multiple. Then more. Then a sustained burst that turned the falling snow strobed in silver. Daniel paused his mop and looked. On the sidewalk outside the revolving doors, separated from him by 40 feet of lobby and 6 inches of temperature-controlled glass, a crowd had gathered. Not the ordinary morning crowd of commuters and couriers. This was tighter, more purposeful, 15 or 20 people with cameras, phones raised, breath fogging in the cold. Press. They were angled toward the south end of the building, where the executive entrance was. The single-door access that required a keycard at the black titanium panel. Daniel watched the flashes. He went back to mopping. Whatever was happening outside was not his concern. The lobby would need a second pass near the revolving doors once the morning commute began, and the foot traffic pulled in the salt and slush. He had 40 minutes before that started. He should work efficiently. He worked efficiently. He did not think about the cameras. He thought about Lily, who had a science project due Thursday on the water cycle, and who had asked him last night, in the specific tone she used when she was actually anxious, whether clouds were heavy or light. He had told her they were light. She had looked at him with the skepticism of a child who has been misled before and said, "But Dad, they have water in them." He had conceded the point. They'd looked it up together on his phone, sitting on the kitchen floor with their backs against the cabinet. And she'd fallen asleep halfway through the explanation with her head on his arm. He was thinking about this when the revolving doors turned. She came through the revolving doors at 5:58 a.m. That was the first wrong thing. Victoria Kane did not arrive at Northbridge Holdings before 7:30. Everyone who worked in this building knew her schedule the way they knew the elevator maintenance days and the quarterly board meeting dates, not because they'd studied it, but because it was woven into the rhythm of the place. She was the pulse. When the pulse changed, you felt it. She was in her coat, the charcoal wool, one that photographers always seemed to catch her in, but it was buttoned wrong. The top button was in the second hole. She'd either dressed in the dark or dressed in a hurry. Her hair was done. Her posture was exact. Her face was composed in the specific way that high-functioning people composed their faces when something had gone seriously, structurally wrong. Daniel knew that face. He'd worn it himself. Once. For about 3 months, after Sarah left, she came through the revolving doors, and she stopped. He was the only person in the lobby. Marcus was still at the far security desk, probably on his second coffee, watching the 6 o'clock news on the small monitor. He kept angled away from the desk cameras. The cleaning crew had left at 5. The morning staff wouldn't arrive for another 40 minutes. She looked at him. Behind her, through the glass, the cameras had followed. The press, they'd come around from the executive entrance to the main face of the building, drawn by the light or by some tip or by the instinct that something was about to happen in the front of Northbridge Holdings on this specific Tuesday morning. The flashes didn't stop. They turned the lobby entrance into something bright and relentless. Victoria Kane turned her head slightly, just enough to register the cameras through the glass. Then she turned back to Daniel. He saw it in the 2 seconds before she spoke. The calculation happening behind her eyes, fast and precise. The way a person on a very high floor does math about a falling object. The problem she was solving was not simple. He couldn't know yet what it was, but he could see, with perfect clarity, that she had found her answer. She crossed the lobby in 8 steps, her heels on the marble, that sound that the executive floor generated and the maintenance level never did, the particular sound of authority in motion. She stopped 18 inches from him. He was holding a mop. He was in a gray uniform shirt with a small Northbridge Facilities logo on the left breast pocket. He was 34 years old, and he smelled like industrial-grade cleaning solution, and his knuckles were cracked, and he had not slept enough because Lily's cough had persisted until nearly midnight. Victoria Kane looked at him and said, very quietly and very clearly, "Kiss me. 7 minutes. Starting now." The lobby was silent except for the distant muted percussion of the city outside. Daniel Hayes looked at the CEO of Northbridge Holdings, the woman whose quarterly addresses he'd watched, through the glass partition of the executive floor's conference room while running a buffer along the corridor. the woman whose name was on the building's internal communications like a signature on a contract, and he said nothing for 4 full seconds. Then he looked at her eyes, not at her face, which was composed and professional and entirely uninformative. At her eyes. They were dark green, which he hadn't known, and they were telling a different story than the rest of her, a story about something urgent and real and slightly desperate beneath all that controlled surface. The cameras were still flashing outside. "Why?" he said. It wasn't the question she'd expected. He could tell because she blinked once, quickly, before she answered. "I'll explain everything afterward. I need this to look real." A pause. "I need it to be real." And that small, fractured distinction was what made him set down the mop. Afterward, Daniel would have difficulty describing exactly what happened in those 7 minutes with the kind of language that made linear sense. It was easier to describe the periphery. The cameras outside had doubled. Someone inside must have sent a signal. Or the crowd had simply grown with the speed crowds grow at when they sense the specific charge in the air that precedes significance. He could see them through his peripheral vision. The flashes coming in waves, the shapes of bodies pressing toward the glass. The lobby's ambient lighting, always soft in the morning, seemed to contract around the two of them. Victoria had stepped closer. She'd lifted her chin slightly, a fraction of an adjustment that changed the geometry in a way that read, from outside the glass, as entirely natural. She knew exactly what she was doing. Every angle, every degree of tilt. This was a woman who had been photographed in public events for 15 years and understood instinctively how a scene composed itself. What she hadn't accounted for was Daniel. He kissed her the way a man kisses someone when he has made a considered decision and intends to keep it. Not a performance, not a flinch, not a tentative approximation of what the moment required. A real thing, a human thing. He felt her go still for 1 second, genuinely still, not performed stillness, and then she adjusted. She put her hand against his shoulder. Not gripping, not pressing, just resting there. The weight of a decision. The flashes outside intensified. Someone on the far side of the lobby, Marcus, probably made a noise that was either a cough or a suppressed sound of profound surprise. 4 minutes in, Daniel became aware of something he hadn't expected. She was shaking slightly. Not visibly from outside the glass, from the cameras, from any external perspective. She was composed and deliberate, but at the point of contact, at his shoulder where her hand rested, there was a tremor, so small that most people would have missed it. Daniel did not miss it because he had held his daughter through enough bad dreams to know the difference between the stillness of calm and the stillness of someone working very hard at calm. Victoria Kane was frightened. At 6 minutes and 40 seconds, she stepped back. Precisely. Her eyes found his immediately, and she held his gaze for 3 full seconds in a way that communicated, without words, something complex and specific that he didn't yet have the context to decode. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was even. "You're welcome," he said. His was too. Behind the glass, the cameras were going absolutely wild. By 8 a.m., the phrase Northbridge Kiss had appeared in approximately 600 online articles, and the figure was climbing. Daniel knew this not because he'd searched for it, but because Diane Carter from HR had appeared at the entrance to his maintenance corridor at 7:15, with the expression of a woman navigating a ship through ice, and had said, in the clipped tone of someone reading from an internal protocol, "Mr. Hayes, I need you to come with me, please." He'd followed her up through the service elevator to the HR suite on the 4th floor, which smelled like printer toner and the specific anxiety of people managing other people's problems. She'd offered him coffee. He'd taken it. She'd explained that the company was receiving a large volume of media inquiries and that, as an employee whose image had appeared in material currently circulating very widely, he was entitled to know that Northbridge's communications department was prepared to assist him with, "I need to make a phone call," Daniel said. "Is that all right?" Diane Carter looked at him over the rim of her glasses. Of course. He called Mrs. Grant, who had Lily for the morning in the event his shift ran long, which it sometimes did. Mrs. Grant picked up on the second ring, as she always did, because Eleanor Grant was 71 years old and had been a school principal for 22 of those years. and regarded a ringing phone as a situation requiring immediate intervention. "She's fine," Mrs. Grant said, before he'd asked. "She's eating the oatmeal with the brown sugar on top, which I know you've said is a treat, but Daniel, it's January, and she's a child." "That's fine," he said. "I might be late." "I assumed." A pause. "I've seen the news. I have opinions. I know. I'll share them when you get here." She hung up. He felt something unknot in his chest. Lily was fine. Lily was eating oatmeal with brown sugar, and Mrs. Grant had opinions, which meant the world was, on some fundamental axis, still rotating correctly. He turned back to Diane Carter, who was watching him with an expression that had shifted from corporate concern to something closer to human curiosity. "I'm available for whatever process you need," he said. "But I'd like to know what happens next." "That," Diane said carefully, "depends a great deal on Miss Kane." At 9:15, a call came through to the HR office extension. Diane picked up, listened, and then held the phone out to Daniel with an expression he couldn't entirely read. "For you," she said. The elevator to the executive suite required a separate key card, which Diane provided from a small drawer in her desk with the air of someone handling materials that required careful management. The elevator itself was different from the service elevator Daniel used every morning, quieter, faster, with walls of brushed steel that showed you a dark reflection of yourself if you looked. He didn't look. The 37th floor was where the building changed its mind about what it was. Below 37, Northbridge Holdings was a professional services firm. Open floors of workstations, glass conference rooms, the functional, efficient architecture of a company that had been built to do things. On 37, it became something else. The ceilings were higher. The materials were different, warmer wood, darker stone, the specific restraint of money that doesn't need to announce itself. Victoria Kane's office occupied the northeast corner of the floor. She was standing when he came in, which was not what he'd expected. He'd expected her seated behind the desk that was the configuration of power, the performance of it. Instead, she was at the window. The city was below and behind her, and the snow was still falling. And the morning had turned fully gray in the way January mornings in New York turned gray. Completely, without apology, as if the sky had simply decided it was done performing light. She turned when the door closed behind him. "Sit," she said. Then, a half-second later, "Please." He sat. She remained standing for a moment, then seemed to make a decision about something internal, and sat across from him, not behind the desk, but in one of the two chairs, set at an angle near the window. The configuration of a conversation, not an interview. "I owe you an explanation," she said. "Yes," he said. She didn't seem bothered by his directness. If anything, something in her posture eased slightly, barely perceptibly. But he noticed. She was a woman accustomed to people who softened things, cushioned things, moved around the point in careful circles. He hadn't done that. "Edward Blake is a board member," she began. "He's been here for 11 years, which is 3 years longer than I have. He controls a significant block of votes, has relationships with 3 of our largest institutional investors, and has spent the last 8 months building a case quiet, methodical, well-sourced in the ways that matter, that I am not the appropriate person to lead this company through its next phase." "What kind of case?" "A narrative." Her jaw tightened slightly. "He has a recording, or he claims to have one. We haven't confirmed it yet, of a conversation between myself and our former CFO that, taken out of context and selectively edited, supports the claim that I traded personal favors for favorable budget allocations during the board restructuring 2 years ago." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Is the recording real?" "The conversation was real. The interpretation is not." She held his gaze. "I need you to understand that." She paused. That wasn't the question she'd expected either. Not "what does that mean?" or "how do I fit in?" but simply why. Why did she need him to understand it? "Because what I'm going to ask you will require you to trust that I'm telling you the truth," she said. "And I can't ask for that trust if I haven't offered the reason for it." He thought about this. "What are you going to ask?" "Blake's strategy depends on a specific image of me." She spoke precisely, The way someone speaks when they've organized their thinking thoroughly. Isolated, self-serving, transactional, someone who uses people as instruments. She looked at him directly. What happened this morning, if I can shape the narrative around it, disrupts that image in a way that a press release or a legal response cannot. It shows something real, something human. You want me to be your human evidence. She didn't flinch from the phrasing. For 8 days. There's a gala, the Northbridge Winter Gala. It's an annual event. Significant board and investor attendance in 8 days. If I walk in there with you, if there's a coherent story, it reframes the conversation in a way that makes Blake's play considerably harder. And after 8 days, you go back to your life exactly as it was. Your position here is entirely secure. Any expenses or disruptions to your schedule, I don't want money, Daniel said. She stopped. He met her eyes steadily. I want to hear you say that my daughter is not part of this. That her name stays out of everything. That if at any point this starts moving in a direction where she could be affected. He paused. I walk. No negotiation. The room was quiet. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Not calculating. Something else. Agreed, she said. And for the first time since he'd walked into the office, her voice lost its professional texture and became simply true. Completely and without qualification. Agreed. He was home by 2:30 that afternoon. Lily was at the kitchen table with her water cycle diagram spread across 3 sheets of taped-together construction paper. Mrs. Grant seated beside her with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the expression of a woman who had been talked into becoming a meteorologist against her will. Dad. Lily didn't look up from her drawing. Did you know that condensation is when water turns back from gas into liquid? We've been doing it all wrong, have we? We thought clouds were just water. But they're water droplets. That's a different thing. That's a very important distinction, Daniel said. He put his bag down and came to look at her diagram. She'd drawn the sun with rays in alternating yellow and orange, which she'd been doing since she was 4. Some things stayed. Mrs. Grant caught his eye over Lily's head and gave him a look that contained approximately 11 separate questions. He gave her a very small nod that communicated, I know. Later, she gave him a look back that communicated, you will explain this fully, and I will not accept summaries. He made dinner the pasta with the roasted tomato sauce Lily liked, the one where she could stir the pan for the last 4 minutes and felt like she'd done most of the work. While it cooked, he sat at the table and watched his daughter explain evaporation to her own drawing, with the patience of someone who has decided the drawing needs to understand. After Lily was in bed, he called Marcus. Marcus Reed had been the overnight security officer at Northbridge for 6 years, which meant he had seen a great deal and had developed a professional's capacity for discretion. He was also the only person at the building who had ever treated Daniel's early morning presence as a fellowship rather than an anomaly. They'd started sharing the first 10 minutes of Daniel's shift in a kind of silent mutual company, Marcus heading off shift, Daniel starting his. Brother, Marcus said when he answered, in a tone that communicated everything. You saw it. I was there. 5 feet away. I thought I'd dreamed it until I turned on the news. A pause. You doing all right? Yeah. Daniel pulled at the label on his water bottle. I'm going to need some time off. Starting next week. Marcus was quiet for a moment. This connected? Yeah. She treating you right? Daniel thought about the moment in the office when Victoria's voice had lost its professional texture and become simply true. I think so, he said. All right, Marcus said. I'll cover what I can on the schedule. You need anything else, you call. He paused. And Daniel? Yeah, she's not what they say about her. I've been watching that woman work for 6 years. She doesn't flinch, and she doesn't quit. And she's the only executive in that building who says good morning to the maintenance staff by name. Another pause. That means something. Daniel sat with that for a long time after he hung up. The week between Tuesday and the gala operated on 2 simultaneous tracks. The first track was his life. Lily's school run, the water cycle project, which received a check, plus from her teacher, and was posted on the classroom bulletin board with a paper cloud cutout. Mrs. Grant's twice-daily check-ins that were ostensibly about Lily, but were really about Daniel, and the careful, ordinary maintenance of the existence he had built around his daughter's well-being. The second track was everything else. A journalist named Craig Whitfield, who wrote for a financial publication that Daniel had never read, called his cell phone on Thursday. He hadn't given anyone his number. He'd had a moment of genuine unease, feeling the first pressure of the story against the boundaries of his ordinary life. "Mr. Hayes," Craig said, "I'm told you have a financial arrangement with Northbridge Holdings that preceded your employment in the facilities department. Can you confirm or deny that? Who told you that?" A pause. "I'm not in a position to..." "Then I'm not in a position to comment." He ended the call. He called Victoria's direct line. She'd given him a card, her personal cell handwritten on the back in precise, angular script, and told her about it. She was quiet for 3 seconds. "Blake is moving faster than I expected," she said. "He's trying to pre-construct the narrative before the gala. If he can establish that you were paid, that this is transactional, then the gala appearance actually reinforces his case rather than disrupting it. How do we counter it? We don't counter it directly. Direct counter-narratives look defensive." She was thinking aloud. He realized, not managing him, actually thinking. The way a person thinks when they trust the person they're talking to. "We control the visual reality at the gala. The story has to be self-evident." "Self-evident how?" A longer pause. "You'd have to trust me about some things I can't fully brief you on in advance." He thought about Marcus saying she doesn't flinch and she doesn't quit. He thought about the tremor he'd felt under her composed hand. That small human truth she hadn't intended him to find. "All right," he said. On Saturday, he drove to the library with Lily and sat in the children's section for 2 hours while she selected 5 books with the gravity of someone making decisions that mattered. On the way home, she asked him, without looking up from the library bag in her lap, whether the lady from the news was his friend. He'd told her, in broad terms, that something had happened at work and that there was a situation he was helping someone with. He'd kept it general. Lily was 7 and possessed, as 7-year-olds sometimes did, of a direct intuitive intelligence that made vagueness feel dishonest. "Kind of," he said. "I don't know her very well yet. Is she nice?" He thought about it genuinely. "I think she works very hard at being someone she needs to be. And I'm not sure she gets to just be nice very often." Lily considered this, with the weight she gave to important things. "That sounds tiring," she said. "Yeah," he said. "It does." On Sunday evening, the clothes arrived. A courier from a shop he'd never heard of. A suit in charcoal gray that fit as though someone had taken his measurements, which of course someone must have. The building had his personnel file, which had his basic physical information. Shirt, tie, cufflinks, all of it exact. All of it deliberately not showy. He put it on and looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for a long moment. He looked like himself. Not like someone else. Not like a costume. Just like himself in better circumstances. He thought that might be the most surprising thing that had happened so far. Number Part 8. The Winter Gala. The snow started again at 4 o'clock on Monday afternoon, which felt either like very good or very bad luck, depending on how you read weather as metaphor. By the time Daniel's car, arranged by Victoria's office, understated, a dark sedan, arrived to collect him. The streets had taken on the particular quality of New York in snowfall, lit and soft and briefly forgiving. Mrs. Grant had been given a full briefing for the evening, including the number for Victoria's head of security in the event of anything she characterized as unusual. She had received this information with the composure of a woman who had navigated union negotiations and budget hearings and was not going to be shaken by a corporate gala. "Go," she'd said to Daniel, with the brisk warmth she reserved for situations she'd decided to fully support. "You look good. Don't apologize for it." Lily had examined him for a full 30 seconds before he left, tilting her head with the same evaluative tilt she used on difficult math problems. "Dad," she said. "Yeah, you look like the dad in a movie. Is that good or bad?" She considered, "The good kind," she said. "The kind who wins." He carried that with him in the car, all the way across town. The gala occupied the full upper floor of the Pemberton Club, a venue with 60 years of institutional memory and walls that had absorbed enough power-adjacent conversation to seem actively attentive. The snow outside gave everything a contained quality, as though the city had stepped back to allow the room to be what it was. Victoria was waiting near the private entrance. He'd seen photographs of her in evening dress press materials, annual report imagery, the kind of professional documentation that flattened people into their official versions. In person, in the specific light of the Pemberton Club's entrance gallery, she was something different. Not more glamorous, just more present, more complicated. She looked at him for a moment before she spoke. "You came," she said. "I said I would," he said. Something passed across her face, swift, quiet, quickly contained. "I know." She adjusted the collar of his jacket approximately 2 millimeters, then seemed to realize she'd done it and stepped back. "Ready?" "Yes," he said. He was. The room was exactly what he'd expected, and nothing like he'd been prepared for. 200 people in formal dress, distributed across a space designed to make them feel both intimate and observed. The board members were clustered toward the north end, near the windows. Daniel identified Edward Blake within 30 seconds of entering, not because he'd been described in any detail, but because Blake was the person whose eyes moved to Victoria with the specific calculation of someone watching a situation unfold according to their planned timeline. Blake was in his mid-60s, silver-haired, the kind of compact build that suggested not athleticism but discipline, the physical expression of controlled ambition. He had 3 people with him, all leaning in slightly, all watching the room. Victoria's hand was at Daniel's arm light. There, a real contact rather than a managed one. She guided him toward the central cluster of guests, not because she needed navigation, but because entering the room meant being seen, entering the room, and she understood the geometry of being seen. 3 people stopped to greet her in the first 5 minutes. She introduced Daniel by name, not by title, not by role, not by any qualifying context, just his name. The way you introduce someone who is simply there because they're meant to be there. He shook hands. He spoke when spoken to and didn't manufacture conversation when it wasn't required. The second introduction, a man named Peter Hartwell, institutional investor. Handshake firm enough to be a test included the following exchange. "You work with Victoria?" Hartwell asked. "I work at North Bridge," Daniel said, which was the truth. Hartwell's expression went through a very fast recalibration. "In what capacity?" "The kind that gets in early," Daniel said. "A half-beat." Then Hartwell laughed a genuine laugh. Surprised out of him, and Daniel felt Victoria's hand, still at his arm, apply the faintest pressure of acknowledgement. It went like that. Each conversation, a small test. Each one navigated without pretense. He was who he was. He made no apologies for it and offered no excessive context. He watched the room, and he noticed things. Which board members watched Victoria with wariness versus respect? Which ones glanced at Blake before speaking? Which ones seemed to be holding a breath they hadn't been holding 30 minutes ago? It was at 40 minutes into the evening, during a pause near the east windows with the snow visible behind the glass, that Edward Blake appeared. He was cordial. He was smooth. He had the specific social grace of a man who has been conducting negotiations in social settings for decades and treats every conversation as an extension of the boardroom. "Daniel Hayes," he said, as though they'd met before, which they hadn't. "I've been looking forward to this." "Have you?" Daniel said. "I've heard a great deal about you this week." Blake's smile was perfect in its composition. "In my experience, people who appear very suddenly in significant situations are usually there for a reason. A pause, precisely calibrated, usually a professional one." "I work in the building," Daniel said. "I was in the building. Something happened." He met Blake's eyes steadily. "That's the whole story, is it?" Blake's eyes moved briefly to Victoria, then back. "It's the true part," Daniel said, "which is the only part that lasts." Something shifted in Blake's expression, not much, but something. A recalibration. The smile remained, but it had changed quality, from confident to attentive. Interesting perspective, Blake said. I have a 7-year-old, Daniel said. She teaches me something new about truth every week. Blake looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, with the specific nod of a man absorbing new information about the terrain he's standing on, and excused himself. Victoria was at his side in under 30 seconds. What did you say to him? She asked quietly. Nothing that wasn't true. She looked at him sideways. In the evening light, with the snow behind the glass, he could see the green of her eyes clearly. That's exactly what worries me, she said. And there was something in her voice that wasn't worry at all. The crisis came at 9:47 p.m. Daniel had seen it approaching for about 15 minutes in the changing temperature of the room, the way clusters of board members had begun to consult phones and then each other, the way the ambient noise of the party had taken on a different texture, conversations becoming quieter and more vertical. Marcus texted him at 9:44. Something dropped. Financial press. Check your source. He'd stepped toward the edge of the room and pulled up the article. It was brief, sourced anonymously, and stated that Daniel Hayes, identified as a maintenance worker, with the specific quotation marks of editorial contempt, had received a wire transfer of $40,000 from a Northbridge subsidiary in the week preceding the gala. It was not true. He knew it was not true. He also knew, with the clarity of someone who had spent 18 months navigating the math of limited resources, exactly what $40,000 meant as a narrative, in the hands of someone who wanted it to mean something specific. He found Victoria near the far end of the room, where she was speaking with 2 board members who had the look of people conducting a weather assessment. He touched her arm. She turned. He showed her the phone. He watched her read it. Her expression didn't change, not in any way that someone unfamiliar with her would have registered, but he was standing close enough to see the exact moment the words landed. And he watched her absorb the hit and hold her position. I need 5 minutes, she said quietly to the board members, with a composure that was extraordinary. They nodded, both slightly uncertain, both watching her face for signals she wasn't giving them. She walked with Daniel to a small anteroom off the main hall, a coat check, now empty, smelling of wool and cedar. The door closed. He planted it, she said. Her voice was low and exact. The account is real. It's a subsidiary, holding used for event expenses. He moved money through it this week, and then gave someone the documentation with your name attached. Can you prove it? My legal team has been tracking his movements for 6 weeks. Yes. She paused. But not tonight. And not before this room finishes deciding what to believe. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then I'll go back out there, he said. She looked at him. And I'll tell them the truth, he said. Not a counter-narrative, just what actually happened. Daniel, I was in the lobby at 5:47 inches the morning because I come in early so the building is quiet, and I have 13 minutes to think before my shift starts. He said it straightforwardly. A woman walked in through the revolving doors who looked like she was doing the same thing, holding herself together by sheer discipline, when the situation didn't warrant confidence. She asked me for something that required trust in someone she didn't know, and I looked at her eyes and I said yes. He paused. That's not a transaction. That's 2 people doing something human in an unhuman situation. Victoria was very still, and if no one believes that, he said, then no one believes it. And I go home and make my daughter breakfast, and take her to school, and the world will have been wrong about a thing, which it sometimes is. She looked at him for a long time. In the narrow anteroom with its cedar smell and the faint percussion of the party on the other side of the door, something moved in her expression through all the layers of discipline and control and professional architecture and landed somewhere real. I believe you, she said. In case that matters. It does, he said. It matters a lot. They went back into the room. Daniel stood with Victoria near the center of the gala floor and told the story. Not loudly, not to the whole room. He was not a performer, and this was not a speech. He told it in the natural radius of conversation, which spread outward the way things spread when they carry weight. He told it simply. He didn't omit anything that made him look ordinary. He didn't soften the fact that he was a maintenance worker, that he'd been mopping a floor, that his hands cracked in the cold, and he'd been thinking about his daughter's science project. He told it as it was. Peter Hartwell, who'd been one of the first conversations of the evening, listened. So did a woman named Sandra Okafor, who sat on the audit committee, and who had the precise listening posture of someone collecting information they intend to act on. Blake was watching from the north end of the room. His expression had changed again. The smooth composure of a man controlling a timeline had been replaced by something that looked, for the first time all evening, like genuine uncertainty. At 11:15, Sandra Okafor excused herself from a group of people and crossed the room to where Blake was standing. They spoke for 4 minutes. Blake's posture changed on the third minute. At 11:42, he left the gala early. He did not say goodbye. The board met in special session 2 days later. Daniel was not present. It was not his meeting, not his world. He was at home with Lily, who had a half-day from school and had decided to use it to teach herself how to make pancakes using a recipe from Mrs. Grant's old cookbook, with the result that the kitchen contained 3 mixing bowls, a flour cloud, and a small person wearing an oven mitt on the wrong hand. "Dad," Lily said, holding up a slightly misshapen pancake on the spatula. "Is this a circle?" "It's a very committed oval," he said. "Is that okay?" "Ovals are good shapes," he said. "They cover more area." She considered this, and then accepted it with the equanimity of someone who has decided that good enough and true can coexist. He got a text from Victoria at 10:43. It said, "Blake resigned this morning." The board voted to proceed with the Q1 strategy, as presented. "Thank you." Then, after a pause of approximately 90 seconds, "How is your daughter?" He looked at the text for a moment. He looked at Lily, who was pouring batter for a second oval with the intense focus of someone who has located their methodology. He typed back, "She's learning to make pancakes. The circles are technically ovals, but she's decided that covers more area, which is correct." A pause. Then, "That might be the best geometric argument I've heard all week." He set the phone down and went to stand beside his daughter at the stove. The winter gala photographs stayed in circulation for several weeks. The industry press, the financial columnists, the business pages of 3 major newspapers, all of which found something to say about the story's arc. The recording investigation that collapsed under legal scrutiny, the subsidiary account that was confirmed to have been manipulated, Blake's resignation letter that cited personal considerations in the specific phrasing of someone who has agreed to language. Daniel's name appeared in a few of these accounts. He read none of them. He went back to Northbridge Holdings on the Monday after the gala. He put on his gray uniform shirt with the small facilities logo on the left breast pocket. He filled the mop bucket. He pushed it out into the lobby at 5:47, which was when he arrived. As always. Because the building at that hour belonged to him in a way it never would at any other time. Marcus was at the security desk. He looked up from his coffee and nodded with the specific nod of a man who has been quietly following a situation and approves of how it resolved. Daniel nodded back. He started with the north section of the lobby, where the foot traffic concentrated around the revolving doors. Salt and slush, pale residue, 12 square feet. He worked methodically. He thought about Lily's pancake geometry. He thought about what he was going to make for dinner. The snow outside had thinned overnight. Morning was coming in gray and clean and without drama. At 6:04, the revolving doors turned. He didn't look up immediately. The morning staff sometimes came early. The coffee delivery came on Mondays. He was halfway through a stroke across the central section of the marble when he heard the particular sound of heels, that sound of authority in motion, and felt the lobby shift slightly, as it sometimes did, in accordance with who had entered it. He looked up. Victoria Kane was in her charcoal coat, buttoned correctly this time. She was holding 2 cups from the coffee shop 3 blocks east, the good one, the independent place, not the chain on the corner. She crossed the lobby in 8 steps and stood at a respectful distance from the mop bucket. "I don't have 7 minutes this morning," she said. "I have about 40. before my first call. That's different, he said. It is, she said. She held out one of the cups. I wasn't sure how you took your coffee. I asked Marcus. He took the cup. He looked at her. Marcus told you I take it black. He did. A pause. He also told me you come in at 5:47 because you like the building quiet, and that you once fixed a squeaking wheel on the supply cart at 3 in the morning without being asked because the sound was bothering the overnight staff. She paused again. He had several things to say. Marcus talks more than people expect. I've noticed that. Something in her voice had the quality it had in the anteroom during the gala. The real quality, behind all the architecture. I just wanted to. She stopped. Started again. I'm not good at this part. I'm very good at most of what my job requires. I'm not good at this. This? Coming somewhere without an agenda. She held his gaze. Just being present with a person because they're worth being present with. The lobby was quiet. Outside, the snow had stopped. Pale early light was beginning to find the east face of the building. And the marble was catching it the way it always did, in winter morning, amber vein gleaming, the whole floor turning briefly into something that looked like it meant something. Daniel took a sip of coffee. It was good. Marcus had given her the right information. You're doing fine, he said. She looked at him for a moment. And then, not composed, not managed, not calibrated for cameras or rooms, or the geometry of being observed, she smiled. Small and real and slightly surprised. The smile of someone finding an emotion they'd misplaced. Thank you, she said. You're welcome, he said. And they stood there in the lobby of Northbridge Holdings, in the pale winter light, in the quiet that belonged to 5:47 inches the morning when the building hadn't decided yet what it was going to be. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday when the snow had finally relented into something that was almost thaw, the doorbell rang at Daniel's apartment at 11 a.m. Lily got to the door first, as she always did. He heard it open. He heard the pause of his daughter, assessing a new person at the threshold, which she did with the careful appraisal of someone who has learned that arrivals require evaluation. Then he heard her say, "Are you the lady from the news?" He came into the hallway. Victoria was at the door in a regular coat, not the charcoal wool one, something less formal, and she had, with apparent seriousness, brought a paper bag from the bakery 2 blocks south of his building. She looked at Lily. "I am," she said. "And you must be the person who taught your dad about ovals." Lily's expression underwent the exact recalibration that indicated someone had correctly identified something she cared about. "Ovals cover more area than circles," she said. "I've been thinking about that all month," Victoria said. "I think you're right." Daniel looked at the two of them standing in his doorway, his daughter and this complicated and genuine and unexpectedly present woman.